My name is Ione Merrick, and I turned 72 this spring. I've always been the kind of woman who folds napkins neatly, keeps her library books stacked in date order, and finds comfort in the quiet routines of an ordinary day. Since Walter died 2 years ago, the house has been too quiet, the kind of silence that sometimes feels like a weight on the chest. That is why, when my daughter suggested a Saturday at Montrose Beach, I said yes without hesitation. It had been years since the four of us sat together for more than an hour. Christina, my eldest at 50, has always walked with her chin lifted a little higher than everyone else's, certain she knew the best way forward. Raquel, at 47, is charming and scatterbrained forever, chasing a deal in her real estate work, but rarely finishing what she begins. Lydia, the youngest, at 45, dresses like the city is her runway, her boutique always on the edge of either brilliance or collapse. They had grown distant since their father's death. Phone calls dwindled, visits clipped short. But today, under the hot Chicago sun, they seemed attentive again. We set ourselves up beneath a striped umbrella near the shoreline. The lake shimmered steel blue. Children squealed as they dashed in and out of the water, and gulls circled above the snack stand. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to belonging. Christina spread out sandwiches she'd picked up from a cafe. Raquel insisted on pouring me lemonade, clucking at me to drink before I got dehydrated. Lydia handed me a pair of oversized sunglasses from her boutique and said they made me look 10 years younger. Their laughter rose in easy waves, and I let myself believe just for a moment that perhaps grief had finally given way to healing. At 2:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Unknown numbers usually meant telemarketers, and I wasn't in the mood to scold anyone about dinnertime calls. Still, the vibration pressed against my palm insistently, and I swiped the screen. The message was short. Leave quietly. Don't tell your daughters. The words blurred, then steadied, as if my eyes couldn't accept them on the first read. I glanced up. My girls were still laughing, Lydia showing Christina a video on her phone, Raquel brushing sand from her legs. They looked so ordinary, so casual, yet the message sliced through the afternoon like glass. A second buzz followed. Your life depends on it. My heart thumped hard enough I thought it might shake the chair. The lake breeze, warm all afternoon, suddenly felt cold against my skin. I swallowed, placed the phone face down on my lap, and told myself not to move too fast. I think I need a little walk, I said, pressing my hand to my temple. Too much sun. Raquel reached for my arm. Want me to come? I forced a smile. No, sweetheart. Just a few steps to clear my head. I stood, legs unsteady, and brushed sand from my skirt. Each step toward the parking lot felt like walking across thin ice, aware that one wrong movement could crack everything open. And then, at the far edge of the lot, I saw it. A red Ford idling with a woman standing beside it watching for me. The gravel in the parking lot crunched under my sandals, each step a little slower than the last. I had the uneasy feeling of being watched, though. When I glanced back, my daughters were still under the umbrella, their shapes blurred against the brightness of the lake. Ahead, by the edge of the lot, the red Ford idled. A woman stood beside it, hair pulled into a ponytail, shoulders stiff with tension. When she saw me, her eyes widened. She raised one hand as though she wasn't sure if she should wave or keep her movements small, careful. I stopped just a few feet away, heart racing. Mrs. Merrick, she said quickly, her voice trembling. Thank God you came. I blinked, recognition dawning as I focused on her face. Nora. It had been years since I'd seen her up close, but I knew her instantly. Nora Jimenez, 30-something, had once worked in Christina's house, keeping things tidy while my eldest traveled for business. I remembered her as a quiet, reliable young woman, always polite when I stopped by. She had a little girl, then Valerie, barely out of diaper. What are you doing here? I whispered, glancing over my shoulder. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Please, Mrs. Merrick, you have to listen. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't urgent. You're in danger. The words chilled me more than the text message had. Danger, from what her hand shook as she gestured toward the car. Not here. If we stay out in the open, they'll see us. Please get in. I'll explain everything." The air seemed to thin around me. I looked back toward the beach, where the umbrella still stood like a marker of normal life. My daughters were there, my flesh and blood, the children I had raised through sicknesses and scraped knees, through teenage heartbreaks and college tuition. To turn my back on them, even for a few minutes, felt unthinkable. And yet, the text, Nora's face, the desperation in her eyes. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely audible. "You don't need to right now," she urged. "I have proof, documents, things I found while working at your daughter's house. They're planning something." I couldn't stay quiet. Proof. The word caught in my chest. Proof of what my daughters had their faults. Certainly they could be careless, selfish, sharp-tongued, but the idea that they would ever harm me felt absurd. Still, Nora's eyes were wide and earnest, and her whole body trembled with the effort of speaking. I wrapped my arms across my chest, holding myself steady against the sudden wind that lifted grit from the pavement. My mind screamed for caution, but another voice whispered, "Trust your gut." Nora took a step nearer, lowering her tone further. "I know it's hard to believe, but I wouldn't be here if it wasn't real. Please, Mrs. Merrick, get in the car. Let me show you what I found." The key fob dangled in her hand, knuckles white around it. Behind us, a gull screeched, and I caught the faint sound of my daughter's laughter, carrying on the breeze, oblivious to my absence. The sound stabbed at me. How could they laugh? While I stood here torn in two, I swallowed hard, fighting the instinct to run back to them and demand explanations. Instead, I looked Nora straight in the eye. She had been nothing but respectful when she worked for Christina. I had once given her maternity clothes. When Valerie was born, had pressed $20 into her hand for cab fare one winter night. Something in me decided then, not fully trusting, but not ready to dismiss her either. "Fine," I whispered, but only for a moment. Relief flashed across her face. She opened the passenger door with trembling fingers, and I slid into the seat, clutching my phone in my lap. The door shut with a hollow thud, sealing me inside a reality I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Nora drove us out of the lot and around the corner, pulling onto a quieter residential street shaded by tall maples. She cut the engine, but left the windows cracked, as if she needed the sound of the wind to steady herself. My palms were damp against my skirt, and I gripped the phone in my lap like a talisman. Nora leaned forward, fishing her cell phone from the pocket of her jeans. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it, scrolling quickly before turning the screen toward me. "Look," she whispered. I took pictures. I didn't know what else to do. The glow of her phone lit up a document, an official bank form, my name typed neatly across the top. My eyes caught on the bottom, where a signature sprawled in dark ink. It was mine. The loops of the I, the firm tail on the K of Merrick. I had written that hand 1,000,000 times in my life. "Do you recognize it?" Nora asked. "Yes," I breathed. My throat tightened. "It looks like mine, but I've never seen this paper before." The title across the top read, "Authorization of Transfer, $9 to $50,000. Every nerve in my body went cold. That number, that exact number, was everything I had saved over decades. Walter's pension, my careful budgeting, the inheritance from my parents. Almost $1,000,000 carved out of years of work and frugality. "I never signed this," I whispered. Nora swiped to the next photo. My pulse throbbed in my temples as the screen revealed another form. Durable power of attorney. My name again, my signature scrawled at the bottom. Only this time, the document clearly handed authority over all my accounts, investments, and property to one person, Christina Merrick. I pressed a hand to my chest as if that would slow the thundering there. Christina, my eldest. The one who had been by my side when Walter was dying, who sat in hospital chairs and told me she'd handle the paperwork so I wouldn't have to think about it. I had trusted her most of all. Nora's finger slid across the screen again. A third photo appeared. My stomach lurched. It was a draft of a will, my name typed neatly at the top, but the provisions inside erased every charitable gift I had planned. St. Michael's Parish, the scholarship fund for underprivileged students, gone. In their place, 3 names stood in bold type: Christina, Raquel, Lydia. My entire estate left solely to my daughters. I closed my eyes, forcing air into my lungs. How could they even? My voice cracked, and I clutched the door handle, as if the car itself might steady me. Nora's voice was quiet, urgent. Do you remember the lunch last weekend? At Christina's house? Images flickered across my mind. A long Sunday table. A bottle of red wine Christina had insisted I try special imported. Raquel laughing too loudly at something trivial. Lydia watching me closely as I lifted the glass. I had felt warm, heavier than usual, as if my limbs had been dipped in syrup. By dessert, my head had been swimming. Yes, I whispered. I remember, feeling strange. Foggy. That's when they did it, Nora said. I found the originals in a folder in Christina's office yesterday. They were banking on you not remembering what you signed. I pressed both hands to my face. The memory was sharp now, my daughters passing papers across the table, laughing it off as routine insurance updates. I hadn't read closely. My head had been spinning. I signed because they said it was necessary, because they were my children, and I had always believed blood meant trust. But the papers on Nora's phone told another story entirely. My own signature stared back at me from the glow of the screen, as damning as any photograph could be. Nora let me sit with the weight of those images for a moment, as if she knew my mind needed time to scrape against disbelief before anything else could land. My eyes stayed fixed on that glowing screen until the letters blurred. The forged will, the power of attorney, my name stolen right out from under me. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, almost careful. There's more you should know. I dropped my hands from my face, forcing myself to look at her. More? My throat was raw, like I'd swallowed smoke. She nodded. When I was cleaning Christina's kitchen yesterday, I found an unmarked bottle tucked behind the spice rack. At first I thought it was cough syrup, but the liquid was clear. I recognized the pharmacy sticker, half torn off, but not fully. I wrote down the lot number before she came back. I stared, trying to understand. What was it? Bromazepam, Nora said quietly. It's a benzodiazepine, used for anxiety, sometimes for sleep. Strong, but not usually dangerous, unless it's misused. She paused. But this wasn't prescribed to Christina. The label was smudged, but I checked. It wasn't hers, and it wasn't stored the way medicine should be. It looked like she'd been diluting it into another bottle wine, maybe. Wine. My stomach twisted. I saw the Sunday table again, the bottle of Merlot Christina had poured with such insistence, saying I had to taste it, that Walter would have loved it. The heavy sweetness on my tongue, the warmth spreading too fast through my limbs. I felt strange that night. I murmured the memory sharp now, foggy. I thought it was grief or the heat. I could barely keep my head up. Nora nodded grimly. That's exactly how benzodiazepines work. They slow everything down, speech, movement, memory. In higher doses, they can make a person compliant, confused. The next day, you might not even remember what you signed. I pressed my palms against my knees, willing myself to stay upright. And you're certain, I'm certain enough, that I risked everything by coming here. Her voice broke a little. I copied the bottle's details. A pharmacist friend confirmed it. It matches the symptoms you described. The car felt smaller now, pressing in with every word. My daughters, my own blood, had poured me drugged wine and slid documents under my hand. I wanted to deny it, to cling to the idea that maybe it was a mistake, some clerical confusion. But the memory of that heavy night, the blurred signatures on Nora's phone, and the word bromazepam fitting into the empty spaces in my memory like a cruel puzzle piece, it all clicked too neatly. Could they prove it? My voice was barely a whisper. Nora hesitated, then said, yes. Benzodiazepines can be detected in hair samples for months. A lab test would show exposure. It wouldn't say who gave it to you, but it would prove you ingested it. The practicality of it made me shiver. Evidence. Not just suspicion, but science. And yet, what did it matter? If the truth meant acknowledging that the three people I loved most had plotted against me, I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the passenger window. A family barbecue, Laughter, grilled corn, the scent of Walter's old hibachi still clinging to the patio. And beneath it all, betrayal slipped into a bottle of wine. They planned it carefully, Nora went on. They knew how much money was at stake. They knew you trusted them. That's why they thought you'd never notice. My chest rose and fell uneven. Betrayal has a taste, I realized. Not bitter, not sharp, but sweet and smooth, like a glass of red wine you never should have swallowed. Nora's hands were tight on the steering wheel, even though the car sat parked in the shade. Her knuckles had gone pale, and for a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine. I stayed silent, staring at the rows of quiet houses and the small strip of sky between their rooftops. I wish the papers were the worst of it, she said finally, but they're not. I turned to her slowly. My voice came out brittle. Then tell me everything. No more pieces. She reached for her phone again, scrolling with quick, practiced swipes, until she opened a folder of images. Receipts filled the screen, high-resolution snapshots of invoices and contracts, some with Christina's name, some with Raquel's, some with Lydia's. This is what I found after I saw the bank forms, she said. I started looking through the drawers in Christina's office and Raquel's messenger bag when they weren't home. These aren't your normal bills. She tapped the first image. A Mercedes-Benz GLC. $95,000 purchased 2 months ago in Christina's name. The next picture. A beachfront condo deed in Michigan City. $180,000 in Raquel's name. Then a third Cartier jewelry. $45,000 billed to a credit account linked to Lydia's boutique. I stared numb. They can't afford this. None of them can afford this. That's what I thought, Nora said quietly. So I kept looking. She opened another image. It was a contract, the kind of document printed on cheap paper, but stamped with a notary seal. Private loan agreement, the heading read. The lender's name made my stomach knot. Miguel El Cuchillo Fernandez. I looked at her blankly. They call him Miguel the Blade, she said, glancing up at me. Southside. He's been running loan sharking operations for years. Extortion threats, a couple of cases that never made it to trial because witnesses disappeared. He doesn't give out second chances. My pulse thudded at my temples. How much Nora's thumb slid across the screen. Christina owes him $150,000. Raquel owes $120,000. Lydia owes $110,000. In total, $380,000, I said before she could finish. The number felt like it had been waiting in my mouth. She nodded grimly. Due in full by July 20th, 5 days from now. The air seemed to leave the car. I gripped the edge of my seat to steady myself, trying to picture each of my daughters at their desks or in their cars, outwardly respectable, but sinking under debts to a man nicknamed for a weapon. They're desperate, Nora continued. I heard Christina on the phone 2 nights ago. She was whispering in the kitchen after dinner, but I could still make out some of it. She said, "We'll have the funds before Thursday." She said your name. She said, "The old problem will be gone." My mouth went dry. Old problem. Nora swallowed hard. I think she meant you. I looked down at my hands. My wedding ring, plain gold, glinted faintly in the dim light. Walter had worn its twin until the day he died. I had raised 3 daughters to believe in honesty, kindness, and hard work, and now I was sitting in a parked car with evidence that they had borrowed themselves into a nightmare and marked me as their exit. They're not just trying to take your money, Nora said, voice low. If the banks hold up the transfers, or if you start asking questions, they might feel like they have no choice. People under Miguel's thumb do things they'd never imagine. I pressed my fingers to my lips, shutting my eyes against the sting. The images on Nora's phone, shiny cars, a condo deed, diamond necklaces, were just props in a play I had never auditioned for. I had been cast as the final payment, the solution to a debt. Outside, a boy pedaled past on a squeaky bike, calling to his friend across the street. His laughter drifted through the open window, incongruously bright in the heavy air. I turned back to Nora and forced myself to sit up straight. I believe you, I said quietly. I don't want to, but I do. Nora's shoulders sagged with relief. Then we have to act now. The police can protect you, but Only if they know everything. Waiting could be dangerous. I took one last look at the photos on her phone before she closed them, as if shutting a door on a nightmare. In 5 days, my daughters would either pay Miguel or do something far worse. And in that moment, I understood whatever I chose next would decide whether I lived to see the end of the week. The fluorescent lights of the Chicago police headquarters felt like an interrogation, all their own, bright, steady, refusing to let anyone hide in shadows. Nora and I sat on vinyl chairs in a small interview room while a young officer took our statements. My hands were still trembling from the drive, the car's hum replaced by the hollow tick of a wall clock. After what felt like an hour, a man in plain clothes came in. He had the bearing of someone who'd earned the right to be listened to, broad-shouldered, salt-and-pepper hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He introduced himself as Detective Inspector Thomas Grant and shook my hand with a firm, measured grip. "Mrs. Merrick," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "We've been working since Nora called. I want you to know we treat this seriously." His voice carried the steadiness I'd been craving. He opened the folder and laid out copies of the photos Nora had shown me, the bank authorization, the power of attorney, the draft will. He also had a list. The receipts for luxury purchases, the copy of the unmarked bottle labeling, and notes from a preliminary interview Nora had given on the phone. He did not exaggerate. He simply presented what the facts would bear. We obtained probable cause from what Nora reported Grant said. Her testimony, combined with the photographic evidence and some corroborating financial activity from the banks, gave us enough to present an affidavit to a judge. We have search warrants issued this morning for Christina's, Raquel's, and Lydia's residences. He watched my face as he spoke, as if gauging the temperature of my reaction. Relief washed through me, quick and sharp. "They're already searching?" I asked. "Yes. Teams were deployed 2 hours ago," he replied. "We also froze the accounts flagged in the transfer paperwork. That prevents any further movement while we investigate." The words sounded protective and final at once, but Grant's next sentence leveled me more than the first. "There's more. We need something the warrants and the lab results can't give us alone." He explained patiently that while the bank documents and chemical analysis could show forgery and the presence of benzodiazepines in my system, prosecutors wanted direct incriminating admissions. Those confessions, captured on contemporaneous audio or video, would solidify the case against conspiracy and attempted murder. "Recorded statements are powerful in court," he said. "They remove the he said, she said, and put the truth on tape." Nora's face went pale but resolute. I felt my breath hitch. The notion of going back into my daughter's house, sitting in their living room, pretending nothing was wrong, while hidden microphones and cameras recorded every word, it sounded like something from a courtroom drama, not my life. Yet I could also see the logic in Grant's plan. No confession, and clever lawyers might argue duress or misinterpretation. Grant outlined the operation with meticulous care. I would return to one of the daughters' homes acting naturally concerned, a little scattered, as I truly felt. I would be fitted with 3 discrete devices, a button mic sewn into my blouse, a coin-sized camera attached to a pair of glasses, and a small GPS-enabled panic pen that would silently alert officers if I felt threatened. Nora would be inside as my support. Surveillance would be stationed on the block, and a rapid response unit would be within 90 seconds if I activated the device. "We'll brief you on everything," Grant said. "You won't do this alone. Our team will monitor the feed in real time. If at any moment you feel unsafe, press the pen once and we move in. Press it twice and we treat it as an emergency." His professionalism comforted me, but not completely. I thought of Christina's hands guiding mine as I signed papers, of Raquel's voice comforting me, of Lydia's practiced concern. To walk back into that house was to step into a room where shadows had already learned my face. "Inspector," I said after a long swallow, "if this is what it takes to prove the truth, then do what you must." My voice surprised me with its steadiness. Grant gave me a brief, almost private nod. "We'll get you through this, Mrs. Merrick. We'll make sure every precaution is taken." They led me to a small equipment room where a young technician demonstrated each piece of gear. The button microphone was no larger than a shirt button. The camera would be mounted in a pair of ordinary reading glasses. The panic pen looked exactly like a pen. When Nora squeezed my hand, the tremor was gone. We had a plan. As they fitted the first device against the fabric of my blouse, I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle into my bones, steady and unshakable. The technician's fingers moved deftly, stitching the tiny microphone into the lining of my blouse as if he were sewing a loose button. He explained that the mic would capture sound in a 15-foot radius, feeding directly to the mobile command van parked just blocks away from Christina's house. I nodded, trying not to dwell on the absurdity of it, me a 72-year-old widow preparing for an undercover operation against her own daughters. Next came the glasses. The frames looked ordinary, even fashionable, but nestled between the hinges was a pinhole camera, no larger than a seed. When I slid them onto my face, the technician adjusted the arms until the angle was perfect. "What you see, will see," he assured me. I forced a thin smile, though the thought of someone else peering through my eyes unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Finally, he placed a pen into my hand. "Sleek, black, ordinary. This is your failsafe," he said. "1 click tells us you're uncomfortable. 2 clicks signals immediate extraction. 3 means life-threatening danger. We come in without hesitation." I held the pen as though it were both weapon and lifeline. It was astonishing how something so small could mean the difference between surviving the night and becoming a headline in tomorrow's paper. Nora stood nearby, her arms folded tightly, listening to every instruction, with the focus of someone ready to take on a battle far bigger than herself. When the briefing ended, she spoke before I could. "I'm going inside with her." Inspector Grant raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't part of the original plan." "She knows me," Nora insisted. "They're used to seeing me in the background, pouring drinks, cleaning up, staying out of the way. If I'm there, it will feel natural, and I can make sure she doesn't eat or drink anything she shouldn't." Grant studied her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "All right, you'll act as her shadow. But remember, you're there to support, not confront. The moment things escalate, you let us handle it." Nora agreed without hesitation. I looked at her, my throat tightening. In the span of a week, she had risked everything: her job, her safety, her daughter's stability, all to protect me. That loyalty stood in brutal contrast to the treachery of my own flesh and blood. When the preparations were finished, Grant dismissed us for a short recess before departure. I stepped into the hallway, fluorescent light washing over pale tile, and leaned against the cool wall. For the first time since the beach, I allowed myself to close my eyes. Images flooded my mind. Walter's smile as he carved Sunday roast Christina, braiding her sister's hair. Raquel chasing fireflies in the backyard. Lydia painting her fingernails with stolen polish from my dresser. My daughters as children, my daughters before ambition and debt had warped them into strangers. Now those same daughters waited in a house filled with leather sofas and false laughter, already rehearsing how to explain my money away. I wondered if they had rehearsed my death too. The thought pierced deeper than any dagger. Nora touched my arm gently. "Mrs. Merrick," she said, "we'll get through this. You're stronger than you know." I opened my eyes. Her face, earnest, steady, was a reminder that not all loyalty is born in the cradle. Sometimes it is chosen, built through respect and decency. I inhaled slowly, steadying my breath, and slid the glasses firmly back into place. The weight of the devices was nothing compared to the heaviness in my chest. Terror pressed against my ribs. Yes, but so did something else, something sharper. The resolve of a mother who would no longer let herself be used, drugged, or signed away. When Grant returned to escort us to the van, I gripped the panic pen one last time, testing its balance in my palm. My hands, surprisingly, were calm. We were ready, or at least we had to be. Raquel's house looked warm and inviting from the outside porch lights, glowing curtains half drawn a wreath of dried lavender on the door. It could have been any family's home on a summer night. But as Nora and I walked up the steps, I felt the weight of the glasses on my nose. the faint pull of the hidden microphone against my blouse, and the slim pen hidden in my pocket. My heart kept time with my footsteps. The door opened before I could knock. Raquel stood there, her eyes wide, a hand pressed dramatically to her chest. "Mom, you scared us half to death today. Where did you go?" She rushed forward to hug me, and her perfume-expensive floral cloying filled my nose. Christina appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel still in her hand. "You just vanished from the beach. We thought something happened." Her tone was gentle, rehearsed. Lydia came in last, her voice sharp but sugar-coated. "Do you know how many calls we tried? We almost called the hospitals." I let myself be shepherded inside, murmuring something about feeling dizzy and needing air. They guided me toward the living room sofa, seating me between Christina and Lydia, as if they wanted to keep me contained. Raquel fussed with a blanket and set it across my lap. "Mom, you shouldn't push yourself," Christina said, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "At your age, a dizzy spell isn't something to ignore." Nora hovered in the background, clutching her bag, playing the role of attentive helper. She caught my eye briefly, just enough to steady me. The living room was immaculate, every surface gleaming, every object curated. Italian leather chairs, a polished coffee table, a framed print of some coastal scene. Yet beneath the tidy comfort, I felt the strain in the air, as if each daughter were waiting for the right cue. Lydia leaned closer, her voice dropping as though it were only for me. "Mom, we were talking earlier about your finances. You shouldn't have to carry all that stress alone." There it was, quicker than I'd expected. Christina picked up the thread seamlessly. "Yes, Mom. Dad always handled those things, and now it's all on you. Wouldn't it be easier to set up a joint account? That way one of us could pay bills, handle transfers. Make sure you're not overwhelmed." I adjusted the glasses on my face, careful to keep my tone measured. "A joint account," Raquel smiled, practiced and coaxing. "Just a small one. Administrative only. You'd still have control. We'd just be helping with the details." I folded my hands over the blanket, keeping the pen's shape against my thigh like a secret. "I've managed so far." "But at what cost?" Christina pressed. "You were confused at the barbecue last week. Remember, you could barely follow the conversation." Her words slid like knives hidden in silk. My stomach clenched, remembering the drugged wine, but outwardly, I let my brow knit in feigned uncertainty. "I do recall feeling odd." "That's exactly what we're worried about," Lydia said quickly. "You shouldn't be left vulnerable." They crowded the air with their voices, weaving a net of concern that barely masked the push beneath it. I let them speak, let their words spill like honey, while every syllable was caught by the button mic hidden against my blouse. Raquel patted my knee, her smile widening. "Mom, think of it as protection. We'd never let anything bad happen to you." I looked from one daughter to the next, their faces soft with practiced worry, their eyes glinting with something harder. For a heartbeat, I saw them as little girls again, begging me to trust them with a secret, promising they'd keep it safe. But those voices, once innocent, now circled me like predators dressed in silk. The blanket on my lap suddenly felt heavy, as if weighted by every lie in the room. The blanket across my knees felt heavier by the minute, though the house was cool and the leather sofa smooth beneath me. My daughter's words swirled around me, honeyed and rehearsed, pressing me toward the joint account they wanted so badly. I let their concern wash over me like a tide until I finally chose my moment. "I keep thinking about last week," I said softly. My eyes lowered. "That barbecue at Raquel's." "You remember?" Christina glanced at Raquel, then back at me, her smile barely faltering. "Of course, Mom. It was lovely. The ribs, the wine, you seemed to enjoy yourself." I shifted slightly, tugging the blanket higher as if I needed comfort. "Yes, but I don't remember everything clearly. I know you handed me some paper. I signed them, but..." I let my voice trail, just enough tremor in it to sound both vulnerable and searching. "I can't recall what they were." The silence that followed was more telling than words. For the briefest moment, all three of my daughters froze. Their eyes darted toward one another, expressions flickering with panic they couldn't smother quickly enough. I knew the camera in my glasses would catch every twitch of their faces. Raquel recovered first, plastering on a reassuring smile. Oh, Mom, that was just routine paperwork. You know, for your health insurance. Update signatures they need every couple of years. Christina leaned in her tone, soothing, careful. Yes, that's all. Nothing important. We'd never give you anything risky to sign without explaining. I nodded slowly, letting doubt linger in my expression. Health insurance, I repeated, tasting the words like they were foreign. It seemed like so many pages. Lydia jumped in too quickly. That's how they always are, full of legal jargon nobody understands. We just wanted to help you, so you wouldn't have to deal with the stress. Her voice cracked slightly on help, and the microphone hidden in my blouse caught it all. I looked at each of them in turn, studying their carefully arranged masks. Their hands folded too neatly, their shoulders too still, their eyes refusing to rest on mine for more than a heartbeat. For years I had blamed distance on grief, on busy schedules, on the hard years after Walter died. Now I saw that what looked like worry was something else entirely: performance, perfected and brittle. I was worried I signed something more, I murmured, dropping my gaze as though ashamed of my own confusion. It didn't feel like health insurance. There were numbers, large ones. Christina's breath hitched before she smoothed it over with a practiced laugh. Oh, Mom, you've always hated forms. I bet you just imagined it. Raquel's hand brushed mine light, almost patronizing. Don't trouble yourself. You're safe with us. But their calm voices didn't match their stiff shoulders, their darting glances. The lie clung to the air like smoke after a candle is blown out, visible even as it tried to vanish. Nora re-entered with a glass of water, setting it carefully in front of me. Her presence gave me something to hold on to, a reminder that not every person in this house had turned into an actor on a dark stage. I lifted the glass, but didn't drink. My daughter's conversation stumbled onward, circling back to joint accounts and simplification. Their words overlapped, each trying to sound gentle, responsible, caring. But the harmony was cracking. The rhythm of their script had faltered when I mentioned the paper. The mask was slipping, and behind it, I could feel the truth straining to break through. The silence in Raquel's living room had thickened no longer. The silence of comfort, but of fear pressed under porcelain smiles. I had let the thread of doubt slip into the air, and now it tugged at them, unraveling what they had rehearsed. Christina broke first. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her voice pitched low, as if confiding something meant to sound noble. Mom, you should know. We're under a lot of pressure. Things haven't been easy. Lydia shot her a sharp glance. Christina. No, Christina snapped back, then softened her tone. She deserves to know. Raquel's hand trembled slightly as she set her wine glass down on the coffee table. We never meant to drag you into it, Mom, but it's gone too far. I sat still, the glass of water untouched in my hands, waiting. Christina exhaled hard, then spoke with a brittle calm. We owe money, a lot of it, to someone you don't say no to, Miguel Fernandez. They call him the Blade. Hearing the name aloud, cold and heavy like a dropped knife, chilled me, even though Nora had already whispered it in the car. How much? My voice cracked, sounding weaker than I felt. Raquel twisted the hem of her blouse. Almost 400,000. The deadline is this week. Lydia's words burst out like steam from a kettle. Thursday. If we don't pay, he'll come for us. You don't understand the kind of man he is. Their rehearsed concern had fractured, spilling into naked desperation. Christina rubbed her temple, speaking almost mechanically. Now the way one recalls a list they've rehearsed too many times. That's why. We needed your cooperation. We needed signatures, transfers. But if the bank slowed things down, if you started asking questions, Raquel swallowed her voice barely above a whisper. There had to be a plan B. The phrase hung in the room like the toll of a bell. Plan B. I forced my breathing to remain steady. Plan B. Christina's eyes darted to mine, then away. She spoke clinically detached, as if she were giving a presentation at work. There are combinations. Certain drugs that simulate heart failure. In someone your age, it would look natural. The room tilted slightly, though I knew it was only the force of her words. Christina stared at the floor. Raquel blinked back tears she didn't want me to see, and Lydia tapped her nails against the armrest, like the ticking of a clock. Their plan had slipped free of its hiding place. No more smiles, no more carefully spun reassurances. They were no longer daughters coaxing their mother. They were conspirators calculating her exit. Nora's shadow shifted in the kitchen doorway, quiet and still bearing witness. My heart pounded so loudly, I worried the microphone in my blouse would capture it. I lowered my gaze, forcing my voice into a whisper, trembling but audible. You would really do this? Christina's answer came after a pause, her tone stripped bare of excuses. We don't have a choice. And with that, the last of their masks fell away. The air in Raquel's living room had turned brittle, the kind that shatters at the slightest touch. My daughter's words still echoed drugs, cremation accident, and though I sat with my gaze lowered, every nerve in my body was strung taut. The devices hidden on me hummed in my awareness, heavy as stone and fragile as glass. Christina stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. She drew the curtain back just an inch enough for the glow of the street lamps to spill onto her face. There's a van out there, she murmured. My pulse stumbled. Raquel frowned. So people park on this street all the time. Christina didn't answer right away. She leaned closer to the glass, peering out like a woman who'd spent too many nights rehearsing disaster. No company logos. Tinted windows. It's been there since we came home. Lydia rose from the sofa, arms folded tight. You're being paranoid. Christina turned her eyes sharp, wild with suspicion. Am I? Or is it possible someone's watching us? The weight of her gaze fell on me. My hands were still folded neatly over the blanket, my voice tucked away. I tried to look bewildered, confused, an old woman caught in the storm of her daughter's crises. But my heartbeat was a drum pounding against my ribs. Raquel reached for Christina's wrist, urging her back to the sofa. Please, don't start. But the spell of calm had broken. Paranoia was bleeding into the room. Lydia crossed the space with quick steps. She crouched in front of me, her eyes narrowing as though searching for something just beneath the surface of my skin. Mom, she said slowly, why do you seem different tonight? I forced a thin smile. Different. How her hand brushed against my blouse, casual at first, then lingering. The brush became a press, fingers tracing over the fabric until they landed against the tiny lump where the button mic was stitched. Her expression hardened. She's wired. The words cut like a blade. Raquel gasped. Christina spun from the window, eyes blazing, and Lydia, always the sharpest, the least sentimental, pressed her palm hard against my chest where the device was hidden. What the hell is this? I froze, every muscle stiff, the panic pen burning against my palm in my pocket. My body screamed to move, to run, to do anything but sit still. But stillness was survival now. If I panicked, if I reached too quickly, if I gave myself away, the next sound might be my daughter's hands tightening around my throat before the police could burst in. Christina's voice rose sharp and frantic. She brought them here. That's why the van. That's why she asked about the papers. She's betraying us. Raquel's lips trembled, her voice breaking. No, she wouldn't. She's our mother. But Lydia's grip on my blouse only tightened her face, twisted with rage and fear. Open your mouth, Mom. Tell me who you've been talking to. The room tilted, my daughters circling like cornered animals. I could feel the panic pen in my pocket, my thumb resting on the trigger, but timing was everything. One wrong second too early, and they'd strike before help could arrive. I drew a shallow breath, summoning every ounce of composure left inside me, and whispered, "You're scaring me." The words trembled like truth, even as my thumb pressed once, twice hard against the pen. The word wired still hung in the air, when Lydia's fist twisted into my blouse, her face a mask of rage and terror. Christina hovered by the window, her voice rising in frantic shards. She brought them here, she betrayed us. Raquel stood rooted by the sofa, whispering, "No, no, no," as if denial could stop the walls from closing in. And then the walls did break. The front door exploded inward with a crack of wood and a thunder that rattled the windows. Splinters sprayed across the polished floor. Dark-clad officers surged through the entryway, helmets, Low rifles raised voices, booming in clipped commands. Chicago PD hands, where we can see them. Chaos detonated. Christina screamed, stumbling back against the wall. Raquel raised both arms in the air, tears streaking her cheeks. Lydia froze with her hand still fisted in my blouse, her eyes wide with something between fury and fear. Drop her. On the ground now. The barked order came from a sergeant with a shield strapped to his arm. Lydia's grip loosened, then fell away. I slid against the sofa cushions, my heart hammering so loud it swallowed the shouts. 2 officers rushed to me, pulling me gently aside, their hands firm but careful. "You're safe, ma'am. Stay with us." The weight of their presence anchored me even as the room spun with screams and stomping boots. Christina's voice cut through the din. "You can't do this. We're her daughters." On the ground face down, an officer barked. She obeyed with a sob pressed flat against the carpet as her wrists were bound with plastic cuffs. Raquel cried openly, pleading even as her arms were pulled behind her. "Mom, tell them. We didn't mean please, we just needed help." But her words drowned under the metallic snap of restraints and the sharp orders echoing against the walls. Lydia resisted longer, twisting, shouting, "She's lying. It's all a setup," before 2 officers forced her to her knees and pulled her hands behind her back. Her defiance cracked only when she caught sight of me standing there, trembling, but alive. Something like recognition flickered in her eyes, then hardened into hate. I pressed a shaking hand to my chest. Breathing felt like pulling air through glass shards. The house, moments ago a stage for whispered plots, was now filled with the clatter of radios and the heavy steps of boots against hardwood. Officers swept through the kitchen, down the hall, securing every room. The lavender wreath on the front door swung crazily, from the impact pedals drifting to the floor like ash. One of the detectives crouched in front of me. He had kind eyes, steady and grounding. "Mrs. Merrick, you're safe. We've got them." I nodded, mutely, unable to form words. My throat was tight, my voice lost in the storm of commands and sobs. Nora appeared at my side, her hand light on my shoulder. "It's over," she whispered, though her eyes glistened with the same disbelief shaking me. "You're alive." Across the city, at that very same moment, another door was splintering open. In a South Side apartment, Miguel the Blade Fernandez was being dragged into custody, cursing in Spanish as officers hauled him out, his empire collapsing under the weight of seized ledgers and frightened witnesses now willing to speak. The synchronized raids had been orchestrated to the second. My daughter's conspiracy and Miguel's shadow empire were bound together, undone together. Back in Raquel's living room, the noise began to ebb. My daughters were lined up, cuffed and furious, their voices hoarse from shouting. The officers held them steady, their badges catching the hard light. I stood there, trembling, every joint quivering, yet still standing, alive. Alive when minutes ago I had sat on that sofa listening to my children discuss my funeral. The Cook County Courthouse had the smell of old wood and paper history pressed into every creak of the benches and every echo of the gavel. I sat on one of those benches that first morning, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the air around me cool but heavy. My daughters were led into the courtroom in chains, dressed not in their tailored blouses and jewelry, but in plain prison jumpsuits. Even then, I could still see the girls they once were. Christina's sharp chin lifted in defiance, Raquel's trembling lips, Lydia's eyes hard as stone. The trial began with the steady voice of the prosecutor, Assistant State's Attorney Daniel Lopez, laying out the case. He did not embellish. He did not need to. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "you will hear in their own words the plans these women made for the death of their mother. You will hear how money, less than $500,000, became more important than blood." I stared down at my folded hands as he spoke, forcing my heart to keep steady. When the first recording played, the courtroom went silent, but for the hiss of the speakers. Christina's voice filled the room, calm, clinical, talking about drug combinations to simulate a heart attack. Then Raquel's quieter tones, wavering, whispering about cremation services that could be arranged in hours. Finally, Lydia's voice, hard and clear. At her age, an accident wouldn't be suspicious. The words already carved into my memory seemed colder when echoed in that sterile chamber. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably, their eyes cutting toward the defendants. My daughters sat still, though Raquel's face crumpled as if she might cry. Then Nora took the stand. She wore a plain navy blouse, her hair pulled neatly back, and she spoke with the same quiet conviction I had first seen in the parking lot that day. She described her years working for Christina, her discovery of the documents, the bottle hidden in the kitchen. She recounted what she'd overheard, the whispered calls to Miguel the Blade Fernandez, the fear in Christina's voice, as she promised that the problem would be gone. When the defense lawyers rose to cross-examine her, their tone was sharp, meant to puncture. "Miss Jimenez, isn't it true you were afraid for your own employment? That you resented Christina's treatment of you, that perhaps you exaggerated what you overheard?" Nora did not falter. "I had no reason to invent anything. I risked my livelihood and my safety to tell the truth. I did it because Mrs. Merrick deserved to know her life was in danger." Her words rang in the air like a bell. The defense pressed harder, leaning on one claim again and again: duress. They painted Miguel Fernandez as the true villain, a predator who had entrapped my daughters with threats of violence. "They were desperate," one lawyer said, gesturing toward Raquel's tear-streaked face. "They believed their own lives and their families' lives were on the line." Miguel's shadow loomed over them. This was not malice. It was survival. I listened, stone still. Yes, Miguel was a monster. Yes, he had ensnared them in debt and fear. But no threat could excuse what I had heard with my own ears, my children calmly weighing the details of my death as though it were an option on a menu. The judge reminded the jury that duress could explain certain actions, but it could not justify conspiracy to commit murder. The law recognized fear. It did not absolve it when the choice made was to sacrifice one life for another's convenience. As I sat there, the air of the courtroom pressing down on me, I felt the truth as plainly as I had the day the police burst through Raquel's door. Love may bind, but greed can sever those ties without mercy. And nothing, not debt, not fear, not blood, could change what my daughters had chosen to do. The courtroom air was always heavy, but on the day I was called to testify, it felt like it might smother me. I took the stand. Slowly, my palms damped the oak railing, cool beneath my fingers, as I swore my oath. The judge's voice faded into a blur. All I could see were my daughters sitting at the defense table, their orange jumpsuits, a brutal reminder of how far we had fallen from Sunday dinners and birthday cakes. Christina sat with her chin high, her jaw tight. Raquel's eyes flickered with shame, never holding mine for more than a heartbeat. Lydia stared at me openly, defiance etched into every line of her face. The prosecutor began gently. "Mrs. Merrick, can you tell the jury what happened on July 15th? I told them everything. The day at Montrose Beach. The text that warned me to leave quietly, meeting Nora in the parking lot. The photos of forged documents. My memory of the barbecue where the wine had left me foggy and weak. And finally, the night in Raquel's living room, when I heard my daughters discuss Plan B, their voices calm and practical as they described my death. At times, my throat tightened so much I thought I might not get the words out, but I looked at the jurors, then at the judge, and I forced myself forward. I owed that much to Walter's memory and to myself. When the prosecutor asked and who was present when those words were spoken, I raised my hand slightly and pointed my finger, trembling. "My daughters," I said, my voice cracking. "Christina, Raquel, Lydia." The defense objected, but the judge overruled. The words stayed in the air, heavy and final. When my testimony ended, I stepped down from the stand. My knees shook, but I stood tall. As I walked past the defense table, Raquel's whisper reached me. "We're still your daughters." I paused, the weight of it sinking into my chest. Still my daughters. The same girls I had cradled through fevers driven to school plays, kissed goodnight after bedtime stories. But now also, the women who had plotted my death with clinical precision. My lips parted, but no sound came. I walked on. The days that followed were a blur of witnesses' evidence arguments. The recordings played again and again, each time more damning. Nora's testimony stood strong under cross-examination. Bank officials confirmed the transfer attempts. A toxicologist explained the effects of bromazepam, describing exactly the symptoms I remembered. The defense hammered their theme of duress, painting Miguel the Blade as the looming figure who forced desperate women into terrible choices. But the prosecution countered with simple truth. They had options. They could have gone to the police, sought bankruptcy, admitted failure. Instead, they chose to conspire. When the jury filed back into the courtroom for the verdict, my breath caught in my throat. The foreman rose, holding the slip of paper like scripture. On the charge of attempted first-degree murder, guilty. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of elder exploitation, guilty. Each word landed like a stone dropped into deep water, rippling outward until it filled the room. Christina's face went pale. Raquel wept openly, shoulders shaking. Lydia clenched her jaw, staring straight ahead, unbroken, even as the judge thanked the jury for their service. I sat frozen, my hands clasped so tightly they ached. I had known this was coming, but knowing did not soften the blow. My daughters, the children of my body, the family I had once believed unshakable, were now convicted criminals. As the bailiffs moved to escort them away, Christina finally turned her voice sharp and desperate. Mom Raquel echoed her through sobs. "Mom, please, we didn't mean..." Even Lydia's eyes flicked toward me, though her lips stayed pressed tight. I could not speak. My throat closed around the word they wanted. They still called me Mom, but in that moment, I no longer knew if I could answer. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after the verdict, forwarded through my attorney's office. The envelope bore the smudged ink of prison mail, the handwriting instantly familiar. Christina's loops careful and precise, the same script she had used on thank you cards when she was a girl. She wrote of regret, of fear, of nights she could not sleep in her cell. She pleaded for me to understand that debt had cornered her, that she had not truly wanted my death. The words stretched across 3 pages, formal, but cracking in places where desperation bled through. Raquel's letter came next, shorter, shakier. She wrote of shame, of how the sound of my voice on the stand haunted her dreams. She begged me not to hate her, said she could still hear Walter's laughter in her memory, and wanted to believe he would forgive her too. Lydia's letter was last. No apologies, no shame, only a sharp insistence that I had betrayed them, that blood should have stayed thicker than law. She claimed the trial had been a trap, that Miguel was the real enemy. She ended with 4 words scrawled in uneven ink: "We're still your daughter." I read each letter in silence, one after the other, setting them neatly in a drawer when I was done. The words stirred grief, yes, but not the confusion they once would have. I had lived too long with grief to mistake it for obligation. At my desk one quiet morning, I wrote my reply. Not to them directly, no addresses, no prison mailboxes, but for myself, a way of cutting the last thread of guilt. "Forgiveness frees me," I wrote in careful, deliberate script, "but it won't free you. I release the weight of what you did. I lay it down so it no longer crushes my chest. But forgiveness does not mean return. It does not mean reconciliation. You are my daughters in name, but family is not a word I lend lightly anymore. I forgive, and I move forward, alone, but free." I folded the page, slipped it into an envelope without a stamp, and tucked it into the back of my journal. It was not a letter for them. It was a letter for me. The house felt different after that. Lighter, quieter in a way that comforted instead of suffocated. When Nora came by with Valerie one Saturday, the girls' laughter filled the kitchen, bouncing against the walls like sunlight. I realized then that forgiveness had made space not for the daughters who betrayed me, but for the people who still chose to stand beside me. The drawer with their letters remained closed. My own letter stayed in my journal, and the door between us, though no longer chained by bitterness, would never again be opened. When Walter and I used to walk the lakefront together, he'd point at the benches where older men played chess and say, "They've got more wisdom than gold." Shame nobody protects either. His words came back to me the morning I signed the founding papers for the Rose Center for Senior Protection. The name was mine, but the heart of it was his. Walter had always believed dignity was the one inheritance worth fighting for. Now, with the fortune my daughters once tried to steal, I was determined to build something that would not vanish into greed. The Rose Center opened in a modest brick building on the north side, sunlight spilling through wide windows. Inside, the rooms filled quickly with people who had their own stories of betrayal, grandparents scammed by fake phone calls, widows pressured into signing away homes, veterans cheated by predatory lenders. For once, I was not alone in my experience. We were a gathering of survivors, and the center became our shelter. We offered legal aid, first volunteer attorneys who reviewed suspicious contracts, who explained rights in plain language. Then came therapy sessions, quiet rooms where grief and shame could finally be spoken aloud. On Tuesday evenings, we held workshops: how to spot forged signatures, how to refuse coercion, even when it came from family. I taught the first session myself, my voice trembling but steadying as I spoke the words, "Respect is not optional. It is the rent someone pays to stay in your life." Nora was my first choice as director. She took the role without hesitation, her spine straight, her voice firm in meetings with lawyers and donors. Watching her in that office, I realized she had saved more than just my life. She had helped birth this new chapter. And then there was Valerie, no longer the toddler I remembered, but a bright-eyed teenager with a quick wit. She often came by after school helping with the computers, setting up chairs before workshops. One afternoon, she pressed a handmade card into my hand. Inside, written in green marker, were the words, "Thank you, Grandma Ione." I had to sit down to read it twice. My daughters might call me Mom from behind bars, but here, in this sunlit room, filled with chosen family, the word Grandma carried no weight of betrayal. It was given freely out of love and loyalty. I pinned Valerie's card on the bulletin board above my desk next to Walter's photo. His smile seemed to approve, as if he too believed that blood was not the only measure of kinship. The Rose Center grew quickly. Soon other cities called asking how to replicate what we had built. But for me, it wasn't about the expansion. It was about walking into that building each morning, breathing air that no longer tasted of fear, and hearing laughter echo in halls once silent. I had lost 3 daughters, but I had gained something that felt even stronger, a family chosen by truth, loyalty, and respect. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snow drifting over Chicago, the kind that softened the noise of the city and made the street lamps glow like halos. At the Rose Center, the windows glimmered with candlelight, each flame reflected in the glass, bright against the winter dark. Inside, the air carried the scent of pine garlands and cinnamon tea. Tables were set with simple red cloths, the kind Walter would have approved of. Practical, unpretentious. The chairs filled quickly, seniors who had found safety here, lawyers who volunteered their time, neighbors who came to support the mission. Each face warmed me. Each smile reminded me of what had grown out of pain. At the front of the room, a piano gleamed beneath soft lights. Valerie sat on the bench, her posture careful but proud. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first notes of Silent Night flowed into the room. Her playing was steady, a little tentative at first, then confident as the melody filled the hall. Conversations hushed. Even the candles seemed to flicker in rhythm with her music. I sat in the front row, Nora at my side. She reached for my hand, a small gesture of solidarity, and I squeezed back. For years, I had believed family was a word fixed in bloodlines. But tonight, watching Valerie's face glow with concentration, hearing her music weave peace into the room, I understood that family was also something chosen, nurtured, and earned. When Valerie finished, the room erupted in applause. She stood, cheeks flushed, and bowed shyly. Then she darted down the steps, placing her arms around me. "Did I do okay, Grandma?" she whispered. "You did beautifully," I told her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. My throat tightened, but this time, not from grief, from joy. I thought of Christina Raquel and Lydia, my daughters by blood, lost to greed and fear. I would never stop loving the memory of who they once were, but the women they became no longer had a place beside me. That absence hurt, yes, but it no longer hollowed me out. Because here, in this candlelit room, I had gained a family I could trust with my heart. I stood when the applause died down, lifting my glass of spiced cider. The crowd quieted their faces, turning toward me. I hadn't planned to speak, but words rose up anyway, certain and clear. "I lost 3 daughters to greed," I said softly, my voice carrying in the stillness, "but I gained a family who knows what love and loyalty mean. Respect, not money, is the rent for a place in my life." The room stayed hushed for a moment, then filled with the warmth of clapping hands of people standing together, of community made real. Outside, the snow continued to fall, settling on the lake in a quiet blanket. Inside, I felt the peace of knowing my story had not ended with betrayal. It had begun again in candlelight, in music, and in the kind of family that could never be stolen.